I don't think it's that difficult at all. I mean, at the end of the day, like, we're as desperate as they come to try to just get a win. Like, so, well, I'm down for whatever. Like, I just want to win. I could care less about anything else. So whatever they need me to do, whatever we need the team to do, like, let's just do that and let's get one win.
The San Francisco 49ers have put themselves in quite the predicament. A fork in the road, if you will. Following the loss to the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football, I'm seeing a lot of 49ers fans in two different camps. You got the first camp, the 49ers, they can still absolutely win their division and get into the playoffs. And once they're in the playoffs, the championship DNA that's built into this team, they can go on a run. The other half, this season's done. Turn the page to 2025. Even if the 49ers do get into the playoffs, they're going to lose. So what's the point? Well, I want to talk about both. What's the realistic path for the San Francisco 49ers to get into the playoffs? And then, of course, what would be the advantages of the 49ers if they were to tank the remainder of this season? So back at it, talking 49ers football. Let's get into it, y'all. Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy, Ryan Teige, back in action. The San Francisco 49ers have most certainly dug themselves in quite the hole. As we all know, the San Francisco 49ers are currently in the sole position of fourth place in the NFC West. You have Seattle at the top, Arizona, Rams, and then the 49ers. This season hasn't been great, to say the least. And currently, right now, I always like to see where's the money at in terms of the sports books. And currently, right now, the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals have the highest odds to win the NFC West at plus 170. So let's talk about it. The 49ers, do they really have a path? Do they have a chance to actually make it into the playoffs? So what's the 49ers' path to actually get into the playoffs? Where they currently stand right now, and I know I'm seeing a lot of percentages out there that the 49ers have an 8% chance or a 10% chance. Whatever the case, there is still a chance. And so the path to get that is now going to require some teams to help out, which is not a good position to be in the NFL. You want to control your own destiny, which the 49ers don't really currently have anymore. So when we take a look, one of the things that I've seen when you take a look at the remaining schedules for the NFC West teams, one thing that jumps off immediately is the Arizona Cardinals and the Los Angeles Rams. They still have 3 more divisional games, whereas the 49ers and the Seahawks, they only have 2 remaining divisional games. So that is something I think that favors the Niners as they currently sit at 1-3 within their division. Seattle is 2-2 in the division because when it comes down to tiebreakers in the playoffs, that stuff matters. But when we take a look at those divisional games, as we all know, especially this year more than ever, there is no team that has asserted themselves as the dominant team in the NFC West. I think that's fair. They are all kind of jumbled bag of shit mixed within each other, and really, it's anyone's game. Yes, the Seattle Seahawks have a 2-game lead, but when you take a look at the Seattle Seahawks schedule, I also believe they have the hardest remaining schedule left. Their next 3 games, it's quite the gauntlet. They have the Arizona Cardinals, a divisional game. That's going to be a tough matchup. And actually, Vegas right now is favoring Arizona to win that game. They have the Arizona Cardinals, then the Packers, and then the Vikings. That's a gauntlet. And when you look at the Packers and Vikings division, they're in a tight race themselves with Detroit all vying to win that division. So those 3 games for the Seattle Seahawks, by no stretch, is going to be an easy route. And in fact, I think it's pretty fair to say that you could see the Seattle Seahawks losing all 3 of those games. And just after that 3-game gauntlet, they still have 1 more divisional game against the Rams in Week 18. So I think the Seattle Seahawks, they're actually in a very tough spot. Although they lead the division currently, I also think they have the toughest schedule. And then when you turn to the Arizona Cardinals, I think out of the NFC West teams, they have the easiest remaining schedule. They got to play the Patriots. They got to play the Panthers. Both games, I think most people would say they should win. Although with the Patriots, ever since putting in their rookie quarterback, Drake May, into the starting lineup, Patriots, they haven't been as easy as an out as what we got to witness when the 49ers played against Jacoby Brissett. But with that being said, I think it's still fair. Arizona Cardinals, they have easily 2 wins on their schedule. But of course, similar to what I just said about the Seahawks, or similar to what I said about the Rams, they have 3 more divisional games. And where an advantage comes in for the 49ers is their last game The 49ers and Arizona Cardinals face off week 18. Well, the advantage for the 49ers is the Arizona Cardinals. It is going to be a back-to-back divisional game for the Arizona Cardinals. They face off against the Rams in week 17, and then they got to take on the 49ers. Those games, that week 18 game could be a massive game to potentially win the division and get into the playoffs, or can mean absolutely dog shit depending on what the 49ers decide to do and what team they actually want to be on the field. But still, Arizona Cardinal, probably easiest of the bunch, but by no means have they been playing consistent football either. So then we take a look at the Rams. The Rams are in a very similar situation as the Arizona Cardinals. They finish their season with back-to-back divisional games. Could be massive games, so just something to keep your eye on. But when you just look at their immediate schedule, who do they got coming up next? They got the Buffalo Bills. And I know I've seen a lot of people talking about, since the Buffalo Bills already won their division, already guaranteed themselves a playoff spot, what's going to keep them motivated? Is it going to be hard to get these guys up to play games? No, it's not, because the Buffalo Bills, they're only one game behind to getting the number 1 seed in the AFC, which of course gets you a first round bye in the playoffs like we saw the 49ers go through last year. In order to skip a playoff round, that is a massive for any team. So the Buffalo Bills are still going to be absolutely determined when they're one game back behind the Chiefs, who have been shaky this entire season. Very similar situation to most teams out there. They could have lost a lot of games, but they've won it. Had a couple calls. They've had a couple cool plays. We all know the Chiefs are the Chiefs, and things have worked out for them again this year. So in order for the 49ers to get into the playoffs, ideally, they would go 5-0. They would win out their games so they could finish the season 10-7. But I like to consider myself a realist, and I think it's safe to say I can't see, and I'm sure you can't either, the 49ers going 5-0, especially with 2 more divisional games going up against the Detroit Lions. There's a game that the 49ers are most likely going to drop. Ideally, they wouldn't, but I think we can be a little bit more realistic and say they're probably going to drop one of those games. But it would still be unbelievable for the 49ers to finish out their season going 4-1, which would make their record at the end of the year 9-8, and that would give them an opportunity to get into the playoffs. There's 2 big pivotal moments in the remaining schedule that I feel the 49ers, they just got to get through or the season is going to be done. Their next 2 games, as we all know, this week they play the Chicago Bears with a rookie quarterback, Caleb Williams, who's been extremely erratic, not making the best decisions, but some Sundays they show up, similar to the 49ers, and look like a good team. Other weeks, not so much. But the one thing that we've seen, the Chicago Bears, they just recently fired their head coach, Matt Eberflus, for the debacle of the game clock management. Gave me Mike McCarthy vibes of the 49ers when they went off in the playoffs and they had a horrible clock management with Dak Prescott at the end of the game. But nonetheless, they're going to be facing off against a rookie quarterback and an interim offensive coordinator turned head coach. So the 49ers, they got to win their next 2 games, the Chicago Bears and the Los Angeles Rams. So that's the first pivotal component. Their next pivotal component is winning their divisional games, which would be the Arizona Cardinals in week 18. In order for the 49ers to have the best chance of success, ideally, they win the next 2 games, and that will be able to tell us a lot more about the direction of where this season could possibly go. Is the push going to be real to the playoffs, or is it going to be a dud of a year and the 49ers are going to wrap things up and turn the page to next season? So let's talk about next season. As I've said from the jump, a lot of 49er fans are out there talking about they should be focusing on 2025. Hell, I even hear pundits of the 49ers like Matt Mayoko, Tim Kawakami, who are steering that way of, hey, this isn't going to be the 49ers year. They're starting to have conversations about what potentially will look like if the 49ers don't have the success they want. And so, of course, naturally, fans, there's a big group of them out there that are saying, this year's done. We got to look to 2025. So what are the advantages if the 49ers were going to tank the remainder of the year? We all know they're not actually going to tank, but if the 49ers went winless for their last 5 games, what would be the advantage? Well, the first and most obvious one is their draft pick order. If the season were to end today, the 49ers would be picking in the 14th spot. They'd have the number 14 pick. And so naturally, the more games the 49ers lose, the higher their draft pick will become. And something that doesn't get mentioned a whole lot, probably because it's too early to be talking about, but the 49ers, depending on where they draft, it could totally change their draft strategy. Similar to what we saw in the year that the 49ers picked up Trey Lance, they knew they were in the 12th spot and they had to get up to get their guy that they wanted. Well, the closer you are to the pick that you want or you think a guy's going to go, the more likelihood they are to be aggressive. when they pick 31st like they did last year, there's really not a whole much they could do. It would cost way too much capital to make any meaningful jump to go get a guy that they like, yet still uncertain because you never know what you're really getting until the players get on the field. And so if the 49ers were to have the 10th overall draft pick, hypothetically, and they really liked a guy at 6 and they thought, I don't know, an offensive tackle was going to go number 6, they would be in a much better position to be aggressive and move up in the draft in order to go get that guy. Whereas if they're further back in the draft order, it would cost too much or wouldn't be worth it with the amount of picks and players that they would have to give to go get one player. So I think a lot of draft strategy comes into where the 49ers pick and something I don't hear a lot of people talking about. And we all know the 49ers, they got some positions, they got some players that they need to address. Like I've already mentioned, offensive tackle, potentially a center, potentially a linebacker. So I won't get into all of it. That'll be an episode for another day. But we all know the 49ers, they got some positions they need to address, and the draft is where they're going to do a majority of that. The second most obvious is the scheduling advantage. So right now, as the 49ers, they play number 1 teams across the division. So this year, the AFC West is playing the NFC West. So the 49ers, because the Chiefs won their division last year, the 49ers had to match up against the Chiefs this year. And we all saw what happened. The 49ers, they got bulldozed. Whereas the Rams, they had to play the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think it's safe to say, regardless of what you think, this year's 49ers team, they would dog walk the Las Vegas Raiders, who are an absolute clusterfuck. No offense. So there is a component of scheduling advantages that the 49ers would have, because I think it's safe to say, everybody feels this way, that the 49ers, they are a better team than what their record shows. They've had a lot of bad bounces. Things haven't gone their way. Injury bug crept up again. There's a lot of factors that go into it, but everybody knows, at least I definitely still know, this 49ers team is a really good team. They have a lot of potential. We've seen them do it before. And so the scheduling, the lower they finish with their record and in the NFC West, the more advantage they'll hypothetically have going into next season. And another one I hear about, which this is one I don't necessarily believe in unless it's a unique circumstance, but I do see some people talking about it can allow for rest and recovery for the players to get ahead of their rehab. By the 49ers losing, it would allow them to remove starters so they can get rest, take care of their bodies. I'm not a believer in that. These players get paid millions of dollars to play football, and it's just of my personal belief, if you're good enough to play, you should be playing. And I'm sure a lot of players feel that way as well.
Fred, asking because your ankle, are you intent on finishing this season regardless of how this plays out?
Oh, Eric, you sly dog. Yes, I am intentful on finishing out the year. Yeah, thanks, buddy.
I only think under certain situations, you'd want to remove a starter so they could start recovering for the 2025 season, because they do have all offseason to recover. So the fact that people are saying they should start rest and recovery now, I'm not a believer in. The only circumstance that I think a player should actually do that is if they needed surgery or something. Outside of surgeries, again, just not something I believe in. You got to play if you're good enough to go. Then there's the most controversial one, because oftentimes it's attached to quarterbacks. And in this case, it's attached to Brock Purdy. The financial flexibility for an organization. Now, I do believe there is some truth to this, that when a team doesn't get into the playoffs and has a disastrous year, ownership is less likely to just dole out money to all their players. For example, the 49ers gave out a shit ton of money last year. Jed York wrote checks for multiple players. Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, which all, coincidentally, all 3 of those guys happen to be injured. But Jed York, he's not been cheap. But when I think there's a lot that goes into that. Due to the 49ers' recent success of making it to NFC championship games every year and a Super Bowl appearance, that's proof of player. That's proof of performance. And an owner who's experienced winning with these specific guys is a much more likelihood for them to be good with giving them a pay raise, signing them to a term contract, because you as the owner, if your team doesn't play good, he doesn't care necessarily about the individual players in this instance. But if I had a bad year, the team is my team. If I had a bad year, why am I going to go pay everybody when there is a bad performance? So I do think there is some truth to it that owners are more hesitant or more reserved to just open up the bank to all these players who want money. And it's also a little easier for players to ask for more money based on success that they had in the season. Again, like we saw this past offseason with Brandon Ayuk, Trent Williams, and Christian McCaffrey. Now, when it comes to Brock Purdy, and again, I see a lot of fans talking about the 49ers, they're going to pay him whatever a quarterback market rate is. And that market rate is $60 million. Some people, Brock Purdy, he should only be getting paid $40 million. Other people, the 49ers should make Brock Purdy play out his final year of his contract. There should be no rush. We need to see more from Brock Purdy. If you just remove Brock Purdy from this equation and just look at it from, does this offer financial flexibility by having a bad year to the season? I think in a way it does. Certain players, they're going to get paid regardless. The superstars, they are going to get paid by any team, by any owner. But I do think there is some substance of truth to that owners, why am I going to reward all these players when we just had a very bad season? And then the final advantage that the 49ers would benefit if they were to, in quotes, tank the remainder of the season is getting ahead of coaching hires. Any team that's going to hire for big time positions within the organizations, those teams are oftentimes not in the playoffs. So for the teams that aren't in the playoffs, they get a head start into their coaching search candidacy. And I think it's safe to say we all know Brian Schneider, the 49ers special teams coordinator, he's not going to be here next year. Hell, he shouldn't be the coach now. I understand that it's too late to make a change. They're going to ride it out. But to have the consistent disasters that the special teams have played throughout this year for the 49ers has already been enough to seal his fate, regardless of how the remainder of the season turns out. Especially when you look at last year, it's been very spotty with special teams. Hell, pretty much Kyle's entire time it's been spotty with special teams. But this year, more so than ever. And I understand players are out there. They're the ones making the mistakes when they're not in the right spot, when they forget to block a guy. But at some point, it does fall on the coach for not putting them in better positions. If you know the weaknesses with your group of players, you got to put them in better positions. However you do that, that's up to you. But what we've seen from Brian Schneider is an absolute joke, and which is why the 49ers are most likely absolutely going to be making a special teams coordinator. And that would give Kyle an opportunity for a coach who's been in consistent playoff runs, deep playoff runs, let alone getting staffed, poached from the 49ers directly. It makes it hard to go back and backfill the positions that you just lost from other teams because they're giving them promotions, but then also going out and finding additional candidates for like a special teams coordinator that already other teams haven't been in deeper, longer, further conversations with. So I do think that is something that would be an advantage. And then, I don't know, maybe Kyle would actually go out and get a legit, bona fide special teams coordinator. That'd be nice, right? But special teams coordinator wouldn't be the only one. Of course, there is a lot of talk around Nick Sorensen. Nick Sorensen, the defense, they've regressed, to say the least. I believe right now they're currently ranked 25th in terms of defense across the NFL, which isn't great. But the one thing that you see is there's no creativity in this defense. It's almost as if the opposing offensive coordinators know what the 49ers defense is going to run. And that is Nick Sorensen. When you know your D-line isn't as good as you thought they'd be, or you're out a player like Nick Bosa, and you know you're not strong there without an individual player or as a unit, you got to get creative with getting a free runner. The 49ers have been absolutely atrocious with simulated pressure or actually getting pressure for a free runner to hit the quarterback. And again, when you're a team that runs base defense or hardly any blitzes, and yet you know, even with your good player on the field like Nick Bosa, you guys still struggle to disrupt the play, you got to get creative and find ways, just like every other good defensive coordinator out there, to get pressure on the goddamn quarterback. So I think Kyle Shanahan, he likes Nick Sorensen, but again, it wasn't Kyle Shanahan's first choice. He was his fourth choice, because if you guys remember, he interviewed Brick, former 49ers, Jets defensive coordinator, now interim head coach. He's not going to be back with the Jets next year, so that's an opportunity there that Kyle Shanahan was interested in last year. And then, of course, Robert Saleh, who's currently working with the Packers on the offensive side of the ball, although I believe he's just dissecting what the opposing defense is doing and where an opportunity would be for the Packers offense. But nonetheless, Robert Saleh is out there. and everybody and their mom would want Robert Saleh back. The energy he brings, how good the defense performed when he was a defensive coordinator, I think that's obviously the most obvious choice that Kyle Shanahan would love to bring back. And then we also heard rumblings that Kyle Shanahan talked to Bill Belichick. Hell, he even spoke to Spagnuolo, the Chiefs defensive coordinator, to see if he could poach him over to the 49ers. So again, I think if there's a better candidate out there, which there will be, Kyle Shanahan is going to have no issue moving on from Sorensen, because Sorensen, he hasn't gotten the job done this year. No creativity. The defense is playing with no fire, no big plays. So I think there's a high likelihood, and although Kyle Shanahan has come out and backed things that Nick Sorensen's doing, I think he likes Nick Sorensen. I think he'd want to keep Nick Sorensen on the staff, but in a demotion fashion, to go out and get another bona fide defensive coordinator. So those are just some of the advantages that the 49ers would have if they were to not get into the playoffs. A lot of it still depending on what they finish out with their record and the still very much viable path to the playoffs. So curious to know what you guys think. What should the 49ers do? Should they absolutely make a push into the playoffs, which, you know, as players and coaches, that's what they're gunning for? Or should they say, fuck it, the season's done, let's tank, and let's look at the advantages that we'll have going into next season? So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. So anyway, we got a big game coming up, 49ers versus the Chicago Bears. If the 49ers, if they lose one of their next two games, the season is essentially almost mathematically completely evaporated. So big game coming up, one and done, treat it as a playoff game, which I believe the 49ers will do. And the 49ers should absolutely beat the Chicago Bears. Absolutely beat the Chicago Bears. So, all right, y'all, I'll be back. But until my next video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. You know the deal. Hit me up. Peace.